Alright, welcome to a tutorial on editing floor plans so that we can scale them to size for printing. What we're going to be talking about is taking drawings that we find either online or through scans and using the graphical scales to scale them up to make sure when we print them that they are indeed to the scale that we want. So we're going to be doing this on this grow box here. This was actually presented to us in one of our lectures recently. It's a really cool home. We're not going to use this image in particular. We're actually going to use one of the plan drawings. One thing I will say is that I have tried to make my setup on Photoshop about as similar as you would find it whenever Photoshop starts up naturally on one of our school computers. If yours looks a little bit different, don't worry that much. Some toolbars or some things might be moved around a little bit, but most of the functionality should be the same, and we'll mostly be using menus and keyboard shortcuts anyway, so you won't need to use the toolbars that much anyway. So first what we're going to do is come up and open our file, and open. And we want to do this floor plan here for the grow box. So open, and we'll bring it up in its own tab up here. So since this is a digital file, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what is the real world scale. It's known as pixels, but we don't know what its actual dimensions are. Photoshop has a tool that allows us to find this out. In particular, it's over in the View toolset up here. This drop-down menu is up at the top of the screen. It should be the third from the right. So whenever you come up, go and hit View, and the thing we're looking for is rulers. You can also hit Control-R to activate them, or you can just come to the menu. So now you'll see that on the top of our viewport here we have these rulers that are telling us what it is in inches. Also on the left over by our tool set. These are pretty important, and they kind of will be used for the entire scaling project. One thing you might want to check, depending on the file that you open, is whether or not they are actually measuring inches or some other type of measurement. If you right click on them, you will get this menu here. Sometimes it will be pixels. If it says 700 of something or more, it is likely that. You can also change it to centimeters and millimeters, depending if you're more familiar with metric and working that way. Although generally within school we're going to be using inches since we teach in the USA and we use imperial units. So we'll leave it at inches. So the other thing that these allow you to do is create guides. Guides are basically lines that you can use to organize your page and make sure that things are properly aligned, but also you can do basic measurements and things with them. In order to create a guide, bring your mouse over one of the rulers, click down, and drag. And you'll see that a line has followed you with it, and it also gives you this information saying what its x coordinate is, which is however many inches it is from the start of the image. What we're going to want to do is take one of these lines and move it to a position here on the ruler that will be easy to determine however many inches something is. So I'm going to actually move it to 1 inch exact. If I just drag it, pull it over, 1 inch. I now know that wherever I set something, it will be based on that, so I just have to subtract 1 inch from it. I tend to like to do this in the middle of it so that I know how things are scaling on the left side of whatever I decide to scale. You can use it at the origin point, but I have problems with things snapping to it in weird ways at that point in time. Do whatever is more comfortable for you, but in this method I will be setting at 1 inch. So now that we have the 1 inch set, we'll need to know how much further we need to set our next guideline that we will be scaling to. You're going to find this information out based on your drawing. In this particular circumstance, this house is actually fairly small. It's a little bit over 30, maybe 40 feet. And there is a nice graphical scale that has been provided to us by the architects. The really handy thing about this is it makes scaling much more accurate and much easier to do. So what we're going to do is decide what scale we want and then to what measurement we're going to make our scaling factor exact to. I'm going to go ahead and go with 1/4 inch equals a foot. It's a very common measurement. So in that regard, we're going to know that every 1/4 inch will equal 1 foot. And then 2 feet then will equal 1/2 inch. 4 feet will equal 1 inch. 8 feet will equal 2 inches. It's basic proportional math. If you need to, just take some time and write that stuff down to the side so that you can stay focused on what you're doing and not forget what you're measuring to and why. It's been a problem in the past, and I have done it myself, so no need to feel any shame about that. But basically just write the steps you're going to do down, you're going to be doing down, and then you'll be a lot more comfortable and safer with that. So I would like to rather scale this to a larger dimension. I think that for the scale of this drawing, either to the 8 foot or to the 16 foot mark is probably fine. We do this because larger dimensions mean more accurate scaling, because things like pixel size and other things can cause problems when you get really small. If we only did like 1 foot or 2 foot, the size of a pixel that we might be off could be huge for the rest of the drawing. So we're going to go ahead with the largest measurement that we have on this graphical scale, the 16 feet. At 1/4 inch equals a foot, that will equal 4 inches. I've set this one already to 1 inch, so I will need to set my next guide to 5 inches. We're going to just come here, drag it all the way over to 5. And we're going to fight the mouse a little bit. There it is. So we're now at 5 inches. Now we need to start editing the layer. We're going to do this through basic transform tools, but before we can do that, we need to unlock the layer that we're using. If you've just opened up an image, or if you're on certain files, it will likely be locked as the background. You can see that down here in the Layers tab. Go ahead and click the little lock on the side to unlock it, and we will now be able to edit it. I'm going to come up to the top left of the screen to this movement button and click that, and this will allow me to move the image around. That checkerboard in the background is transparency, so there's really nothing under it. It just is kind of Photoshop's vocabulary for there's nothing here. So what we're going to want to do is move the 0 right here as close to that first line as we need, or as we can get. So that looks pretty close, but to be sure and to be more accurate, what we can do is zoom in. I generally use the keyboard shortcuts for this, which is just Control+, although there is a tool on the left side called the zoom tool, and you can also use a keyboard shortcut Z. For this purpose, I'm going to just be saying Control+ and Control- to zoom in and out as we need it. So Control+, and then navigate to where your guide and your 0 mark is. And as you can see, we're about 2 or so pixels off. So we're going to go ahead and move that left. One thing you can also do if you don't want to have to fight your mouse for accuracy is use the arrow keys, and it will usually move in very small increments one at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and select the layer that I'm using and hit left, left, left. And that looks pretty close. It's probably as close as we can get depending on how this graphical scale was made, because that thickness of the line can give us some error. But it looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out so we can see the rest of the image. Great. So what we now need to do is set our lockdown point. That is this point here in the center. It can be selected with this move tool and moved around as we need it. Now, these tools show up whenever you have under your, moving is considered a transformation also. So every time you want to do something or move out of your tool, you will have to either apply or not apply that transformation. We're going to go ahead and hit apply because there's nothing we can't change and everything should be where we want it anyway. So this button at the top is the lockdown point. and it shows up whenever you're doing editing or transform controls. Yours may not look exactly like this. I generally have this feature selected most of the time, and that feature is right up here under the Show Transform controls. If you don't have that, your image will probably just look like this, and whenever you move it around, you won't see any of those things. I'm going to go ahead and undo that because I had it where I wanted it. You can go ahead and select that to get those, or you can use the menu Edit to go find transform tools. For those who are curious, transform tools are basically those types of graphical transformations that they talked about in math class and algebra whenever you started graphing things. Knowing the actual math isn't that important unless you're probably programming this. For us, we just want to know what function we want to do. In this particular circumstance, we want to scale. We're going to go ahead and click that, and it will make the solid border around it, and it will also put these types of controllers on the layer that we're scaling. So we're going to take this lockdown point and we're going to set it right here at 0, which for us we set at 1 inches. Unfortunately, you can't move this one with the arrow key, so you do have to fight with the mouse a little bit. Great. So whenever you transform something, there's a couple of things to know. You can do multiple types of transformations, such as rotate and move and scale, but whenever you're doing a particular one, there's ways you can lock down proportions and constrain things. If I were to just transform this normally, I would start getting stretching and squashing, and all of our data would no longer make any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and let go and undo using Control Z. In order to make sure that your height and your length of your drawing is consistent, you're going to want to hold Shift. That will constrain it so that regardless of where you move your mouse, it moves in proportion to your drawing. Now, you'll see that our 0 point is moving away from that line. That's problematic for us. What we're going to want to do is keep that 0 point there and then scale that 16-foot mark to our other line that we have over here. So I'm going to go ahead and let go and undo. The other thing is the Alt key. The Alt key will lock down that center point and designate it as the center point upon which we will do our transformation. Otherwise, we'll use the very center of the drawing or the opposite corner, depending on whatever mode you have selected. So I will hold down Alt and Shift, and at this corner, we'll be able to start scaling based on that. And so you can see we can get that 16 pretty close. That looks pretty good. Let go. I'm going to check by zooming in for accuracy once again. So Control++. And we're going to move down out of the white field. That looks pretty close. It's the end of the pixel. Depending on how you want to go about it, you could say the middle would be better, but you can see that it's kind of blurry and jaggedy here. You're really not getting more exact, you're just choosing which side of the line you want the line to be on, because you can't have it both ways. So we'll go ahead and zoom back out. So great, we have our drawing scaled. However, the drawing is not here anymore. It's very much outside of our viewing angle. This view angle viewport here is called our canvas, by the way. And you can see based on the rest of this box that it is much larger. So what we're going to have to do is create a much larger box. And we can edit that without having to create a new file or do anything else. I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter to lock down our transformation. And we're going to kind of look at the box. It looks like it's a little over 2 times more than the size of our current canvas. So just to be safe, we're going to increase it by 3 times. In order to do that, we come up to the Image toolbar. It is between Edit and Layer. So click on that and come down to Canvas Size. Alt-Control-C is your keyboard shortcut, but you can use the menu just as well. So we can see that this is about 5.5 to 6 inches. It's not perfectly square, but it's close. If we wanted to double it, we'd probably go to 11. If we wanted to triple it, we could go a little bit higher. I would say 15 is close. We're being rough and rounding here a little bit, but for what we're doing, we don't need to be that precise. We're just trying to see more of the drawing. So we're going to go ahead and change this to 15, and then we will also have to change the height as well. We'll go ahead and make that 15 as well. These two measurements don't necessarily lock to each other. If you need to change something into portrait or landscape based on however you're laying out your boards, that could be useful. For what we're doing, we just want to see more of the thing that we just scaled. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. All right. So obviously our size is much larger. We see this large transparent area, but our drawing is still kind of in an inopportune location for printing. So we're going to go ahead and just come up to the Move tool and move it back down. And it looks like there's a little bit below and a little bit above, but it's probably not actually important information. Most of this drawing has this white space around it, so we're probably fine. However, if you wanted to save paper or condense this a little bit more, what we could do is take out this extra white space and this transparent space. The tool to use that is called the crop tool. You'll find it in the toolbar to the left. It looks like these two framing squares, creating a type of square, really. You can also hit the C button to activate this tool. So we're going to go ahead and click it, and you'll notice that there's these kind of framing squares right at the corners. By clicking these, we can move them, and it will change the size of our drawing. This is a more intuitive way than necessarily just typing in numbers. And you can use this to increase the size of your drawing as well. Our previous step, we could have just done this, but it's good to know both ways to do it. So we're going to go ahead and set it to there. All this white area will be kept, the black area will be discarded. I'm going to hit enter to finish that operation, and we should now have our drawing. These guides will not show up on the drawing, by the way. They're only in Photoshop. If you save it as an editable Photoshop file, they will come back, which is really useful for drawings that may take a lot longer or board setups, but you don't have to worry about them when they're printing. So now that we have a file, we need to save it in a format that will save those size dimensions and will allow us to print it at the appropriate size. That file format is PDF, by the way. So we're going to come up to File, and we're going to come to Save As. So I've already had this selected from a previous run through of this tutorial, but what we're going to want to do is change this to PDF. Many times it will stay at JPEG or bitmap or PNG based on what your original file format was. Just come select Photoshop PDF right down here, and then we can go ahead and save it. And I'll save it as something new just to make sure I'm not overwriting anything. So now we have our floor plan set up and ready to save. We'll get a dialog box that comes up. We're going to hit OK on that. We're going to just hit Save PDF, and we're going to hit Yes. There are settings in there that you may want to change eventually, but for the intents and purposes of this tutorial, they're not really that important. If you want to be able to check the different size information of a PDF you already have and just make sure that it's going to be correct, just note what your probable size is going to be here in Photoshop. It looks like it's just above 13 inches, and this was just above 15. So you can actually just check the properties of the PDF. If you come down to the folder where you've saved something, and open up the one, this number 2 was the one we just saved, and we now have our PDF. Up in Files and Properties, there is this right here, and look at that, 13.5 by 15 inches. I eyeballed that, I was pretty close. So there you have it. That is how you select your image and scale it to your appropriate size and make it in a format that our printers will be able to read. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask myself, Brian, in the building, or consult some upper years because they've been through this quite a bit before as well. They don't bite, I promise. All right, have a great day.